that subtitle in brackets is really what it's about, what we now know about the pearl-bordered fritillary that we didn't 15 years ago, which I think is in keeping with the theme of the conference. So that's me, and I'm speaking actually wearing the hat of the Trossachs Pearl-Bordered Fritillary Restoration Project, grand title, and one that I'm proud to wear. There we are. So, sorry, just going back to that last slide was of Loch Katrine from Primrose Hill, which is a place you may or may not know. Stunning view in the middle of the Trossachs. And this is what I'm talking about, this stunningly beautiful spring butterfly, which I think is quite sexy. The males hatch first in round about mid-May, and they go patrolling down their little favorite corridors looking for females. It's a very short flight season, only about a month. More of that in a minute. So I want to start roughly 14 years ago or so. This is the distribution map of Scotland for PBF as we thought it was in 1980, actually. I mentioned it's a specialist butterfly. It has not only does it have a short flight season, has a very specific habitat, and it's quite mobile. If it doesn't like the habitat in one place, it will go looking for another habitat nearby. It's quite migratory in some senses. Because of the decline in traditional woodland management, especially rotational coppicing, there's been a massive decline across the UK. And something like 90% of the colonies have disappeared in lowland Britain. Here in Scotland, the situation is better, it's a bit more stable. And you can see highlighted in the middle, right down towards the bottom of the distribution map there, you can see highlighted in yellow is the Trossachs area sites as we thought they were in 1980. But then the butterfly disappeared. There was no record after 1988, and various people went looking for it, couldn't find it. I became involved, as I said, about 2008. The Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park Biodiversity Action Plan bravely said that it should be a priority species, but didn't have any idea as to how to find it. So I got interested in this, and I was aware already that there was a partnership set up called the Great Trossachs Forest Partnership, involving RSPB, who own the Inversnaid estate, Forestry and Land Scotland, who own this large chunk of green, which is the Loch Katrine area, and then also the Woodland Trust, who own the Glenfinglas estate. This is a total area of something like 16,000 hectares of contiguous land. And they were interested in doing something about finding pearl-bordered fritillary and, if possible, conserving it. So I was taken on a very, very sort of flimsy contract by Butterfly Conservation and Forestry and Land Scotland to try and find this. And it involved working with a small group of volunteers on an annual basis, looking at 3 supposedly favorable habitats along the north shore of Loch Katrine, roughly along there. And this went on for about 9 years. And in the meantime, the Great Trossachs Forest Partnership went on to do great work in a lot of large-scale broad-leafed tree planting, access work. And in 2015, SNH declared this Scotland's 2nd biggest national nature reserve. So things were happening, but not for PBF. And just so you get some idea of what I'm talking about, this was largely about monitoring potentially favorable habitat for the butterfly, using what's known as day 4 methodology perfected by butterfly conservation elsewhere in the UK, which is basically going to an area and identifying what plants are rare or occasional or frequent or abundant or dominant, hence the initials DAFOR. And in all that time, we managed to see one pearl border fritillary in 2011 by chance. It was all very hit or miss. And by 2016, well-known lepidopterists were saying, no, PBF is extinct in the Trossachs. No hope, it's gone. Well, at that point, I sat down with Katie Anderson in Forestry and Land Scotland, Aberfoyle office, and Paul Mapplebeck, who was then the branch chairman, South West Scotland, Butterfly Conservation, and we decided a new approach was needed. And it was very fortuitous that the Great Trossachs Forest Partnership also shared our interest. So a steering group was set up with the partners and with myself acting as project manager, and a funding commitment on quite a modest scale from Forestry and Land Scotland. And also very, very fortunately, coincidentally, Butterfly Conservation had recently commissioned research on a new pearl border fritillary species distribution model using a system of coefficient measurements for ranking specific 1 kilometre Ordnance Survey squares in their order of priority for favourable habitat based on certain criteria. And you can see on that slide that a number of squares were identified and ranked. Red is high, orange is quite good, yellow is average, green is pretty poor, and white is really not worth bothering with, but you never know. So that was about 20 odd squares. And what was very encouraging was that a very similar methodology had been used very successfully by Butterfly Conservation volunteers in Loch Arbour in 2014 and 15, using a very similar modelling system for the checkered skipper. And the number of known colonies of checkered skipper was hugely expanded in that time. So we had a sort of track record of success elsewhere. And so this modeling system, it uses spatial data sets. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a particularly IT literate person, actually. But what I can tell you is that what you end up with is a coefficient score between 0.00 and 1.00 per square, using a number of criteria, and I've listed those there. So altitude, presence of south-facing slopes, woodland cover, soils, favourable plants, larger way leaves, which are managed usually by Scottish Power, and climate. And these are all factors which in fact play a huge part in the distribution of this particular butterfly. So we then began to recruit or think about recruiting volunteer surveyors and allocating them to specific 1 kilometre squares and approaching this from a totally systematic angle for the first time. And the idea was that each volunteer team, 1 or 2 people, would carry out ground truthing initial visits to each square where there was a high coefficient score. And so this slide is really a sort of summary of what happened in the first full survey season in 2018. And the first success was that we actually got 17 volunteers who all turned up for a training day on a rather soggy day at the Glenfinglas Woodland Trust steading. And we went out and we looked at completing favourable habitat distribution forms. And we also talked a lot about distinguishing the pearl-bordered from the small pearl-bordered fritillary. And if you look at your conference program, you'll see a picture of what's called the small pearl-bordered fritillary. And I think that was a slight mistake by somebody, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, just to make quite clear you understand, these are very similar looking butterflies, but the pearl-bordered fritillary is on the wing between mid-May, mid-June. Small pearl-bordered is a bit later. And just to make life more fun, they overlap during early June. So therefore, you need to have not only your plant ID skills, but your butterfly ID skills reasonably well honed if you're going to go looking for this particular butterfly. We targeted 21 kilometer squares over a 4-week period, and the really exciting news, highlighted in yellow, we recorded 45 pearl-bordered fritillaries from 3 1-kilometer squares, all on Forest and Land Scotland ground, 2 of which had very high coefficient scores. So that demonstrated that the methodology worked and that indeed pearl-bordered fritillary was not extinct in the Trossachs. And that was really the sort of start of a sort of 3 to 4 year annual program. We used the same planning, the same methodology in 2019 and 2021. 2020 was the year of COVID, of course, so not much happened then. But we used a fabulous piece of ground just below the Banan slopes as a training site for the annual workshops in early May. And here are some pictures of our volunteers and some who are not volunteers on those days. And this was really, really great because, in fact, in 2019, I led them up there and I said, now this should be a really good hotspot for pearl-bordered fritillary. Within literally a minute, we had 3 flying around. That was very satisfying indeed. So I got a bit chuffed. And in total, 21 volunteers have been involved in all 3 of these surveys in total. So the same people have come back each year largely. And that's increased our knowledge base and their experience. And my role was to plan and coordinate this and produce an annual report, which went round the project partners. These 2 slides are quite important. Up at the top, you've got your 20 priority 1-kilometer squares I mentioned, and ranked in color code. So red was important, brown not so important, green very important. And the really good news was that by the end of 2021, after three seasons, we had actually increased the number of 1-kilometer squares populated by pearl-bordered fritillary from 0 up to 6. And those squares in green around here are the squares. So this is really the sort of heartland of the butterfly. And just to close, to actually focus that in a bit more detail, this gives you the distribution map of the main colonies, and you'll see that they're actually in 4 meta-populations, as the word goes. The red dots are the records from 2018, the green from 2019, the blue from 2020, which is literally just one visit, and the orange in 2021. And it was the 2021 visits that really did expand our knowledge of where this butterfly is and why it's there very considerably. Just to sort of emphasize the fact that this shaded area is the Banan and Brennachoil triple SI, and there was no previous reference to PBF at all in that triple SI citation. So this was all news as far as Forest and Land Scotland were concerned. The other point just to mention is that getting up to these sites is difficult. There are no footpaths, it is rough ground, you want to be prepared for some rough walking, and above all, you need to use both GPS and digital photography if you're going to actually do a good job. So our general observations from those 3 years can be summarized quite simply. I've mentioned a very short flight period. We didn't record anything outside the sort of bracket of 15th of May and 9th of June. Although since then, I've actually seen one or two slightly later than that. So it's very much a spring butterfly. And in terms of the plants and vegetation, the three key plants are the food plant dog violet and bugle and primrose as the main nectar sources for the adult butterflies. The other key ecological requirement is that you need not too much and not too little bracken cover. And you can see from those photos the kind of bracken cover that I'm talking about. And these are very often found in sheltered niche habitats, often close to or below rocky outcrops where the actual latent air temperature is that much warmer. They tend to like drier ground, and typically we found all these colonies at an altitude of between 170 and 320 meters, surprisingly high up, nothing lower than that at all. And I mean, it's a butterfly of the woodland edge and glade habitats, which of course change dramatically from time to time. So that's why it's become a very mobile species. And interestingly enough, these were all coming from sites where there was no conscious management by FLS at all. There was some grazing by deer, and that's about it. So that's how much we knew by the beginning of this year. And we then entered into a new phase, which I'm delighted to speak about for the first time, really, because in April this year, we were joined by Jessica Burrows, PhD researcher here at Stirling University, who has done a lot of excellent field work on Pearl Fritillary in Cumbria. And as you can see from the slide, she produced a report on her secondment to butterfly conservation and our project called Ovipositioning Behavior and Preferences of Pearl Fritillary at Loch Katrine. And this was the first time that we'd actually had somebody who was bringing professional ecological knowledge to this project. And her aim was to use the egg-laying behavior of PBF females to identify the most viable colonies, which would therefore guide habitat management through site-specific recommendations for key areas. And she was using an established methodology which she used in Cumbria for that purpose, to study microhabitat and microclimate choice. So basically, this enabled us to understand where the butterflies were egg laying and why, and how well the existing conditions on the ground supported this. And what Jess found was that there were, she used four relatively easily accessible sites, and on the map, they were the Primrose Hill Trail, which is up the top there, which I've mentioned, which is very accessible, as the name suggests. The much larger Benvenue slopes, which interestingly is where the old 1980s records came from. And then down the bottom, above the road to the Loch Katrine Dam sluices, two more sites there. And what Jess concluded quite rapidly was that the Benvenue slope was absolutely ideal for this butterfly. So far from it being extinct in the Trossachs, it was actually doing extraordinarily well, which is very, very interesting. It's a very large area, south-facing, has abundant violet plants, unideal microclimate conditions. And Jess has suggested that this would be an ideal place to actually use as a kind of training venue for anybody who wants to understand the butterfly. It's that good. She also went on to say that all the other three sites would benefit from future conservation management. And one of the things that she spent most of her time doing was measuring hotspot temperatures. We already know that PBF females are heavily influenced by the ground temperature and ambient temperature, and that they select areas where the ground temperature is that much higher. So Jess was going around with a temperature gun and a temperature probe to calculate the actual data from the sites that she visited. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, both at the Benvenue and the Dam Road slope sites, the females were indeed selecting hotspots which are significantly warmer than the surrounding habitat. And very interesting, the actual differential is around about 5 degrees centigrade. So it is extraordinary that these butterflies, actually are conditioned to do this. And she suggested that we should think in terms of a long-term conservation strategy for the butterfly, and that we will indeed continue with our survey work, because I think what we now want to do is to try and create conditions where there is maximum connectivity between these 4 particular areas, so that this will actually safeguard the butterfly for the long-term future. One of the techniques for monitoring the health of butterflies, as you may know, is to actually develop new transect routes, which are walked from A to B on a regular basis by volunteers throughout an insect's flight season. And we will do that both at Benvenue and at Primrose Hill. And then we will also do some practical conservation work for the first time. And these 2 slides show where we might start. The Primrose Hill site, which is basically in that blue area, or just along that corner, has got it's got a problem with mature conifers. It's also got other areas of open bracken which might be very suitable. But critically, it's also got these other areas in yellow where a degree of opening up of the tree canopy would actually be very beneficial. And then at the Dam Road site, there is a large, extensive amount of very thick bracken. It's a miracle the butterfly is still there at all. So the idea would be to actually use a combination of machinery and volunteers to bash the bracken. And just to sort of wind up, solving the enigma, I'd just like to emphasize 1 or 2 key points as to how we've got to where we have. This has been a partnership exercise for running a project. We've used proven survey methodologies, and I think prove that they do work. But above all, this is about skilled volunteer commitment throughout. Sorry, I think I've gone back too far. That's it.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Back. Oh, no. There we are. So these are pictures of some of the volunteers who took part at different stages. It's absolutely fantastic to work with people who take a passionate interest in this. And I'd just like to sort of close by really saying that sincere thanks are due to many, many different people who've taken part in this. Just to let you know that we will be recruiting new volunteers next year. So if you are interested, please come and talk to me. There will be a flyer going out around about March, April next year. That's my email address if you're interested. And I just thought I'd close by just showing you this slide at the very end. Try and spot the pearl-balled fritillary egg.